in case you thought it was only the Liberal Democrats. Well, we know why they want an election. National debt is rising. The true figures of their preferred deal are appearing. £70 billion over 10 years, we heard today from the National Institute. A winter NHS crisis beckons. Schools still on short measures in some places. Northern Ireland sold short, and Johnson rumbled on that. And vitally, the impact of a hard Brexit has yet to be felt, or even perhaps the argument's over, as the noble Lord Wigley said. So the Conservatives, for electoral advantage, which the Fixed-Term Parliament Act was meant to prevent, want an election before the fruits of their ham-fisted policies have yet to bite. I urge them not to be complacent. The public might just see through them and grasp why they're being sent out to polling stations in the run-up to Christmas. It's not really to unclog Parliament. The Commons having given the Withdrawal Agreement Bill a second reading. If there'd been a decent programme motion, as my noble friend Lady Smith said earlier, which only needed, after all, the Prime Minister to swallow his pride over the totem 31st of October date, then he could have got the Withdrawal Agreement Bill through well before the 31st of January, and negotiations on our future relations with the EU could have begun. Of course, the government might feel complacent because they know they may not be playing absolutely fair. Having an election before we've sorted out the regulation of targeted digital campaigning will probably play into the hands of a certain Dominic Cummings. I'm not saying it's the dark arts, but what I do know is that it is neither transparent nor regulated, as my noble friend Lord Putnam made abundantly clear in his contribution. The noble Earl, the Minister, when he responds, needs to spell out what steps the Government and the Electoral Commission will take to ensure a fair and open contest. For Labour, we look forward to being able to take our challenge to the Government to every street, village, town and city of the country. We'll show what damage the government is risking to the car industry, to farming, to the environment, to consumers, and to our vibrant service sector by its approach to Brexit. And we'll highlight the impact its policies already have on the poor and the disadvantaged, to those living with debt and insecurity, those dependent on social services, on working families torn between jobs and paying for childcare, on students graduating with massive debt, on young couples no longer even able to dream of owning their own house, on people on zero-hour contracts, on the elderly finding it hard to see a GP or a dentist anytime soon, and on teachers and nurses who at the end of the month can't find the money for any luxuries because after years of pay restraint. It will become clear over these coming weeks that the Prime Minister is not a man who can be trusted. He owes no loyalty even to his own MPs, let alone to society. He's a man with only one person's future at heart, and that's his own. I confess, I never wanted a winter election. I hate cold, dark mornings, and I hate early sunsets. But what I do want is the chance to rid this country of this government. So here's to this bill and to the election it now brings. Yeah.
My Lords, this has been a very constructive and focused debate, and I'd like to thank all noble Lords who have contributed to it. Unsurprisingly, we have heard a range of views expressed on all sides of the House about the bill and the reasons why we find ourselves debating it. So a helpful place for me to start, I think, is to return briefly to first base by re-emphasising the key points made earlier by my noble friend, the Leader of the House. Why do we believe a general election is now necessary? The hung Parliament that we're in, complicated by the divergent views of elected members across all parties on the most significant political and constitutional issue of our day has created an impasse. It is an impasse which the government is clear cannot be allowed to continue. The withdrawal agreement negotiated by my right honourable friend Theresa May was rejected on 3 separate occasions earlier this year. The Prime Minister has successfully negotiated a new deal, and the other place passed the revised withdrawal agreement bill at second reading, but by also voting down the government's programme motion, they prevented the progress of that bill and hence this country's departure from the European Union by the 31st of October. Then, despite the extension of the Article 50 deadline, conversations held in another place made it apparent to the government that there could be no certainty or anything approaching certainty of the withdrawal agreement bill receiving parliamentary approval through all its subsequent stages. So contrary to the contention made by the noble Baroness, the leader of the opposition, it was not the rejection of the programme motion that brought this bill about. It was that the government's realisation that even the 3-month extension to the 31st of January left the fate of the bill wide open. The noble Baroness Lady Smith said that she accepted that there should be a general election. I wish she had done so with as much good grace as the noble Lord Newby. All the main political parties are now agreed that a general election is needed in order for the British people to have their say, and we earnestly hope to provide a new Parliament with a way forward. So, my Lords, this is a short and simple bill which sets the date of the election as the 12th of December. The general election timetable allows for the Northern Ireland Budget Bill to pass before dissolution to ensure that the Northern Ireland Civil Service can access the funding it needs to deliver public services and proper governance in the province. But the 12th of December date is important for another reason. It is critical that we do not miss this opportunity to have an election and a new Parliament sitting before Christmas. An election on the following Thursday, the 19th, would not allow time for the new Parliament to sit before the start of the new year. The noble Lord Butler, in his intervention, asked me for the earliest date on which Parliament could first sit following the poll. My right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, has stated that if our party were to win the election, he would aim for both houses to reconvene before the 23rd of December. However, the exact date cannot be set until after dissolution, when the Sovereign issues a proclamation. So I regret that I can't be more specific than that to the noble Lord.
I'm very grateful to the noble Lord for that, but surely the Queen cannot reopen Parliament before Christmas on the 23rd of December. I mean, it would be an absurd time, really, to have a reopening of Parliament. So surely the answer is it can't be, the Queen can't reopen Parliament until the 6th of January. One then has a Queen's speech, so the proceedings on the bill are unlikely to start before the week beginning the 13th of January. We're then getting into just as difficult a position in passing the bill before 31st of December as we were previously.
I can't agree entirely with the noble Lord. The House will have followed his train of thought. However, it is possible, nevertheless, for Parliament to convene before Christmas, for swearing in and so forth to take place, and we can get that part of things done. But I'm not in a position, as I've said, to speculate in advance of the Sovereign's proclamation the exact timetable following that.
Address, noble Lord, I think the House would like a bit more information. When he says that the House could reconvene before the 23rd of December, I think most members of your Lordship's House, and indeed the other place, would expect that some business would be undertaken. If the election was to be on the 12th, I see very little reason why the House could not reconvene the following week. And he will appreciate that there is legislation that will be required before the end of January. Surely the government doesn't intend to come back or start dealing with business by the middle of January.
before we have a new government in place, it is certainly not in my gift or my hands to specify the date on which Parliament returns, or indeed what Parliament will do when it does return. However, I'm sure the noble Baroness, if and when she is elected to office, will see to it that there is a rapid reconvening of Parliament. My Lords, I listened with care and a great deal of sympathy to the noble Lord Putnam and the noble Lord Whitty on the critical issue of transparency in electoral campaigning, and I also read the noble Lord's article in the Times today. His criticisms of the government are noted, but I hope he will accept that the government is committed to increasing transparency in digital campaigning to maintain a fair and proportionate democratic process. As both noble lords will know, to this end, on the 5th of May this year, the government announced that it will implement an imprints regime for digital election material. And the aim of that is precisely to ensure greater transparency and make it clearer to the electorate who has produced and who has promoted online political materials. As I confirmed...
I'm very grateful to Noble Earl. We had some exchanges on this particular point last Wednesday, and as he's now repeated to your lordships, the commitment was given as long ago as May. What exactly is he proposing should now take place to ensure that those very urgent controls are implemented before the poll takes place?
I can understand the noble lord's impatience for moving faster in this area, but nothing would be worse, as I'm sure he would acknowledge, than getting this wrong. If we were to proceed in haste, we could either find ourselves unintentionally stifling democratic debate with overly restrictive regulations, or else we would be rushing through a regime which would mean that people will be unknowingly committing an offence, and we wouldn't want that either. It is a much more complex area of the law to get right than it may at first appear. But specifically, I can reconfirm my commitment.
Thank you very much, Noble Earl, to giving way to me. All I'm trying to get to is nothing can be worse, nothing, than a contested election. And at present, the rules we're applying make that almost inevitable. And if it's a very close election, as I suspect it will, it doesn't matter which party, as I mentioned, wins. It will be a contested election. I can't think, in terms of the fragile state of our democracy at the moment, I can't think of a worse outcome.
I understand the noble lord's concern, and I am sorry that it has not proved possible to enact the measures that I'm sure we would all want to see. But I reconfirm the commitment that the government has given that if re-elected, the proposals, we will bring forward detailed proposals on the scope of the new regime over the coming months for further scrutiny. The noble Baroness Lady Bennet spoke in her clear and emphatic way in favour of strengthening the powers of the Electoral Commission. I hope she knows that the government works closely with the Electoral Commission to protect the integrity and the security and effectiveness of referendums and elections. The Electoral Commission has civil sanctioning powers that apply to referendums and elections. More serious criminal matters can be and are referred to the police and then considered by a court of law. The courts already have the power to levy unlimited fines. It's important to remember, though, that the Commission is independent of government and accountable to Parliament through the Speaker's Committee on the Electoral Commission. Quite rightly, the government is not involved in the decisions over what the Electoral Commission investigates or the fines that it may impose. The Electoral Commission has recommended that its sanctioning powers be increased, and the government is considering that proposal. The amendment that the noble Baroness spoke to would involve giving the Electoral Commission fining powers far beyond those of most other civil regulators. My own view, and that of the government, is that that would not be proportionate. Even the Electoral Commission has not suggested having unlimited fining powers. Instead, it has suggested that it should be raised to hundreds of thousands of pounds so that it can punish and deter the most serious offences. But more broadly, as the noble Baroness herself said, changes to electoral law can't be made overnight. They require extensive stakeholder engagement to ensure that they are workable and proportionate. Political parties vary considerably in size and professionalism, and it's important to ensure that regulation of them is fair and proportionate so as not to undermine local democracy or discourage engagement. The Noble Earl Lord Kinnoul called for the rapid reappointment of your Lordship's select committees following the convening of the new Parliament, and I recognise the importance of the issue that the Noble Earl has raised. The reappointment of our select committees is, of course, a matter for the Committee of Selection. They are usually reappointed early in any new session, and I'm sure the usual channels will do everything they can to help make that happen. But ultimately, these reappointments are not a matter for the government. The noble and learned Lord Judge spoke powerfully about the Fixed Term Parliaments Act and the need for Parliament to reconsider its provisions, and my noble friend Lord Elton added weight to those comments. I'm grateful to the noble and learned Lord and my noble friend for what they said. These are serious matters which deserve appropriate consideration. The Fixed Term Parliaments Act provides that the Prime Minister must make arrangements in 2020 for a committee to carry out a review of the operation of the Act. The new government will be bound to instigate that review and consider its outcome very carefully. The noble Baroness Lady Smith and indeed the noble Lord Wallace of Saltaire expressed concerns about the possible tone of the forthcoming election campaign and the need to prevent candidate intimidation and to maintain respectful debate across the country. Democracy, my lords, is a cornerstone of British values, and the key to a healthy democracy is having respectful, vibrant and open debate. However, this freedom cannot be an excuse, can never be an excuse, to cause harm or spread hatred, and a line is crossed when disagreement mutates into intimidation, violence or abuse. The government recognises that rising levels of intimidation in public life can stop talented people, particularly women and those from minority backgrounds, from standing for public office, and that is why we are taking action to confront it and will continue to do so if re-elected to government. My lords, the purpose of this bill is to allow the British people to have their say and to give the other place the mandate to resolve this deadlock and have sufficient time to act before the 31st of January 2020. This is our last opportunity to hold an election in a timely way before that date, an election that has significant cross-party support in the other place. I'm sure that your lordships will ensure the swift passage of this vital bill and enable an election on the 12th of December. My lords, I beg to move.
The question is that this bill be now read a second time. As many of that opinion will say content. Content. The contrary not content. The contents have it.
My Lords, I beg to move that this bill be committed to a committee of the whole House.
The question is that this bill be committed to a committee of the whole House. As many of that opinion will say content. Content. Contrary not content. The contents have it.
My Lords, I beg to move that the House to adjourn during pleasure until a time to be announced on the Annunciator, which will be not less than 30 minutes.
The question is that the House be adjourned during pleasure to a time to be notified on the Annunciators. As many of that opinion will say content, the contrary not content, the contents have it.